The autumn wind swept across the northern plains, carrying the scent of dried sage and distant rain. Dakota crouched beside his small fire as the sun bled crimson across the western horizon, feeding twigs into flames that barely held back the evening chill. He was Lakota, 26 years old, with shoulders broadened by hard labor and eyes that had witnessed too many broken treaties. The scar running from his left shoulder to his ribs, a souvenir from a cattle rustler's knife 2 winters past, ached in the cold, reminding him that survival on this land came at a price. Beside him, Eva's heart shook so violently that her teeth chattered. Her calico dress was torn at the shoulder from where the wagon's splintered seat had caught her during the runaway, and her auburn hair had escaped its pins, falling in wild tangles around a face pale with shock. She was 22, raised in Cincinnati's parlors, and educated in deportment and French, utterly unprepared for the brutal reality of frontier life. Her hands, soft and ink-stained from keeping her father's ledgers, now bore fresh rope burns from trying to control the panicked team. Dakota unwrapped the fringed buckskin jacket from his shoulders and settled it around Ava's trembling frame. The leather still held his warmth, and she pulled it close with a small, desperate sound that made his chest tighten. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind's low moan. "For the wagon. For killing that snake. For everything." Dakota nodded, once settling beside her, not touching, but close enough that his presence became a windbreak, a human anchor against the vast emptiness surrounding them. "You are safe now," he said in careful English, the words still foreign on his tongue, despite years of speaking them. Ava's laugh cracked like thin ice. "Safe? I haven't been safe since." She stopped, her throat working, and when she spoke again, the words tumbled out in a torrent she could no longer contain. "He comes every night. My father. Except it can't be my father, because my father is dead and buried. But someone opens my door after midnight, wearing his cavalry coat, standing in the doorway, watching me. And I wake up with bruises I don't remember getting, and things moved around, and I think I'm losing my mind." "Stop." Dakota's hand closed gently over her wrist, his calloused fingers warm against her pulse point. He could feel her heart racing like a trapped rabbit's. "Breathe slow, like this." He demonstrated his chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm he used before loosing an arrow, and after a moment Eva tried to match it. "Your father," Dakota said quietly. "Colonel Benjamin Hart. He died 4 months ago. Horse fall near the cottonwoods." Eva confirmed, her voice steadier now, but hollow. "Broke his neck, Doctor. Hayes said it was instant. But now something comes every night, and he wears my father's coat and smells like coal oil. And the door latch is always filed smooth in the morning, and I don't know what's real anymore." Dakota studied her face in the firelight, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the way her gaze kept drifting toward the darkening prairie, as if expecting something to emerge from the grass. He had seen enough in his life to know the difference between madness and truth. Ava Hart was terrified, exhausted, pushed to the breaking point, but she was not insane. "Then it is not your father's ghost," he said with quiet certainty. "It is a man, and men leave tracks." Ava turned to look at him, their faces suddenly close in the firelight's intimate circle. For a long moment their eyes held, and Dakota saw hope kindle there, fragile as a candle flame, but real. "You believe me?" she breathed. "Yes." A coyote's howl rose from somewhere west, soon joined by others in that eerie chorus that made settlers bolt their doors. Ava flinched, and Dakota shifted closer, his arm coming around her ribs, not an embrace, but the practical warmth of shared body heat. Ava's hand found his where it rested against her side, her fingers curling around his instinctively. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Your father kept his promise, Lakota said simply. He shared Heart Spring with my uncle's band. He honored the water agreement when other settlers would not. That means something. And if he hadn't? Lakota was quiet for a moment, feeling the weight of her against his side, the trust she was offering, despite having every reason to fear him. I would still help, he admitted. Because you asked. And because walking away would make me less than the man my uncle raised me to be. The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling into the darkening sky. Around them, the prairie settled into its nighttime rhythms, the rustle of small creatures in the grass, the distant hoot of an owl, the endless whisper of wind through dried stems. And as the first stars appeared overhead, two strangers huddled together for warmth, their breathing gradually synchronizing in the ancient pattern of survival, finding in each other an unexpected sanctuary against the darkness closing in. Tomorrow they would return to Eva's homestead and search for evidence. Tomorrow they would begin unraveling the mystery of who was terrorizing her and why. But tonight, with coyotes singing and the temperature dropping toward frost, they had only this small fire in each other, and somehow, impossibly, that felt like enough. The northern plains in the autumn of 1878 were caught between worlds. Telegraph poles marched across the horizon like skeletal sentinels, their copper wires humming with messages that traveled faster than horses. Barbed wire had begun appearing on the open range, transforming boundless grassland into parcels that could be owned, defended, and fought over. The great buffalo herds were gone, reduced to scattered remnants, and the Lakota bands that had followed them for generations now moved in smaller groups, clinging to the shrinking territories that treaties endlessly revised and broken still nominally granted them. Heart Spring sat at the intersection of all these tensions. It bubbled up from limestone bedrock at the base of a low ridge, fed by an underground river that never failed even in the worst droughts. The water was cold and sweet, pooling in a natural basin before spilling down into a creek that wandered east toward the Little Missouri. For generations, uncounted Lakota bands had camped there in summer, watering their ponies and trading with trappers who ventured this far west. When Colonel Benjamin Hart had claimed the surrounding quarter section under the Homestead Act, 6 years ago, building a cabin and barn, and bringing his daughter west after his wife died of consumption in Ohio. He had done something remarkable. He had honored the Lakota's use of the spring. The letter he signed with Dakota's uncle Wakesa was simple and unprecedented. It stated in plain English that Heart Spring would remain accessible to Lakota bands for watering and camping in perpetuity in exchange for peaceful passage and mutual aid. Dr. Ephraim Hayes, the circuit physician who traveled between Bluebird Crossing and Devil's Gate, had witnessed both signatures and kept a copy in his files. Colonel Hart had kept his word until the day he died. Now Ava stood to inherit not just the land, but the weight of that promise. And she had no idea how to carry it. She had come west at 18, fresh from Miss Porter's school for young ladies, expecting to keep house for her widowed father, and perhaps teach piano to settlers' children. What she found instead was a land that demanded skills she did not possess: how to harness a team, how to milk a cow, how to shoot straight enough to kill a rattlesnake before it struck. Her father had tried to teach her, but his duties as a part-time Army scout and mediator kept him away for weeks at a stretch, leaving Eva to manage with hired hands who drifted away as soon as better prospects appeared. When Colonel Hart died 4 months ago, his body found crumpled at the base of a cottonwood, his neck broken at an unnatural angle, Eva had been left utterly alone. The funeral was sparsely attended. Dr. Hayes, Miss Charlotte Blake, the school teacher, a handful of neighboring farmers, and a delegation of 3 Lakota elders, including Wakesa, who had spoken a blessing in his own language that Ava could not understand but felt in her bones. The nighttime visits began a week later. The first time Ava had been sorting her father's papers at his desk, trying to make sense of land patents and water rights and survey maps, when she heard the latch lift. The cabin door swung open, and there in the moonlight stood a figure in her father's cavalry greatcoat, the one with the distinctive brass buttons and the colonel's insignia on the collar. The figure stood motionless for perhaps 30 seconds, and Ava's heart had seized with impossible hope. But then the figure stepped backward and the door closed, and when Ava finally forced herself to run outside with a lamp, there was no one, only the wind and the distant howl of coyotes. It happened again the next night. And the next, always the same, the latch lifting the door, opening the silent figure in the greatcoat. Sometimes Ava pretended to sleep, watching through slitted eyes as the figure moved through the cabin, touching her father's papers, opening the trunk where he kept his military records. Once she woke to find a bruise on her forearm, dark purple and thumb-shaped, as if someone had gripped her while she slept. The memory of that discovery made her stomach churn even now. She told no one at first, afraid they would think her grief mad. But the lack of sleep began to show the dark circles, the trembling hands, as the way she jumped at shadows. And yesterday, desperate for supplies, she had hitched the wagon herself and started the journey to Bluebird Crossing, only to have the brake fail on a downslope and the team bolt when a rattlesnake struck at them from the tall grass. Lakota had been riding the ridge above Hart Spring, checking on the water flow as he did every few weeks, per his uncle's request, when he saw the runaway wagon careening toward a ravine. He had kicked his paint horse into a gallop, racing to intercept, and at the last possible moment leapt from his saddle to grab the lead horse's bridle. His boots had dug furrows in the earth as he hauled back with every ounce of strength he possessed, shoulders screaming and muscles burning, until finally the wagon shuddered to a halt, 10 feet from the edge. Then he had killed the rattlesnake with a single arrow, through its skull, helped Ava down from the seat with shaking hands, and listened as her story spilled out in a torrent of fear and exhaustion. Now, as dawn broke cold and gray over the prairie, they rode double on Lakota's paint horse toward the Hart homestead. Eva sat in front, her back against Lakota's chest, his arms bracketing her as he held the reins. The position was practical, nothing more. They had only one horse between them, but Eva found herself acutely aware of every point of contact. But the solid warmth of him behind her, the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the way his forearms brushed her sides when he adjusted the reins. "Tell me about the spring," Lakota said quietly as they rode. "About your father's work there." Eva gathered her thoughts, grateful for the distraction from her spiraling fears. He was surveying the water flow, keeping records of usage. He believed that if homesteaders and Lakota bands could see documented proof that there was enough water for everyone, there would be less conflict. He kept ledgers, careful notes about seasonal flow rates, how many head of cattle each rancher watered when your uncle's band camped, and for how long. "A fair accounting," Lakota said approvingly. He believed in fairness. Ava replied, her voice catching slightly. "He said the spring was older than any of our claims to it, and that water rights should be earned through stewardship, not seized through force." "Wise words," Lakota said, "but not words that men like Silas Malloy would want to hear." Eva stiffened. "You know about Malloy." "Everyone knows about Malloy," Lakota replied. "He runs 3,000 head of cattle on the northern range. He has been pushing to expand his grazing land for years, buying out small homesteaders, pressuring others to leave. My uncle says Malloy views the prairie as his personal empire. He's been trying to buy Hart Spring since before my father died," Eva said. "He offered $500 the first time, then 1,000, then 2,000. Each time my father refused, Malloy's offers got more aggressive. The last time he brought Sheriff Rourke with him and implied that it would be unfortunate if something happened to our property while we were unprotected." Lakota's arms tightened slightly around her, a protective instinct he seemed unaware of. And your father did not back down. Never. He said Heart Spring was held in trust, not owned. That breaking his word to your uncle would dishonor everything he believed in. Ava's voice grew thick. I think that's why they killed him. The words hung in the morning air, between them stark and terrible. Dakota did not contradict her or offer false comfort. Instead, he said quietly, Then we will prove it, and we will make sure they answer for what they have done. The homestead appeared as the sun climbed higher, its light thin and pale. The cabin was solid log construction with a sod roof built to withstand prairie winters. The barn leaned slightly, but was functional, housing a single cow and a few chickens. A small corral held Eva's remaining horse, a chestnut mare her father had called Copper. Everything looked normal, peaceful even in the morning light. But Dakota's eyes narrowed as they approached. He dismounted first, his hand dropping to the knife at his belt, and moved toward the cabin door with the fluid caution of a hunter approaching uncertain game. Eva slid down from the horse and followed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The door was closed and the latch in place. But when Dakota crouched to examine the threshold, his expression went hard. Look, he said, pointing. Boot prints clear in the dust that had settled overnight. Military-style boots with a distinctive split in the iron heel where the metal had been poorly repaired. The prints led from the barn to the cabin, and back again, pressed deep into the earth, a heavy man, moving with purpose. There were at least a dozen prints layered over each other, indicating multiple visits. Dakota followed the tracks to the barn, and Eva trailed behind her, breath coming short. Inside, the dim interior smelled of hay and animal warmth, but underlying, it was something else, a sharp chemical smell that made Eva's nose wrinkle and her eyes water slightly. Coal oil, Dakota said, kneeling beside a dark stain on the dirt floor. He touched his finger to it carefully, then brought it to his nose. Fresh, no more than a day old, and a lot of it someone spilled this deliberately or refilled a lamp here. Eva moved deeper into the barn, her eyes adjusting to the shadows, and suddenly stopped. Hanging on a peg that should have been empty was her father's cavalry greatcoat. The brass buttons gleamed dully in the filtered light, and the wool smelled strongly of coal oil and old sweat, so strong it made her gag slightly. That shouldn't be here, Eva whispered, her voice shaking. I packed it away after the funeral. I folded it carefully and put it in the trunk in the cabin with his other uniforms wrapped in tissue paper. I remember because I cried while doing it. Dakota lifted the coat with both hands, examining it with the focused attention of a scout reading sign. He turned it inside out, checking the lining carefully, and found a small tear in one pocket, fresh, the threads still bright white against the faded fabric. The cuffs showed faint stains, and the right shoulder bore a dark mark that had soaked into the wool fibers. Someone wore this recently, Dakota said, his voice grim. The tear is new. See how the threads are still bright. They have not oxidized or collected dirt. And here, he pointed to the stains on the cuffs. Coal oil transferred from hands. And this, he indicated the shoulder mark, then carefully sniffed near it without touching. This is old blood. Months old, judging by the color and the way it has set into the fiber. Ava's hand flew to her mouth, her face draining of color. My father was wearing that coat the day he died. I remember because he always wore it. When he rode the property, he said it made him feel official, like he was still serving. Dakota's jaw tightened. He set the coat down carefully and began searching the rest of the barn with methodical precision. In the back corner, half hidden under loose straw, he found a leather satchel that Eva had never seen before. Inside were items that made her blood run cold: a tin of lamp oil matches, a small file worn smooth from use, and most damning papers. Eva snatched up the papers with trembling hands. The top document was a deed freshly prepared with official seals and flowing script. It transferred ownership of Hart Spring and the surrounding quarter section from Eva Hart to Silas Malloy, dated just 3 days ago. The signature at the bottom read, Eva Hart, in a flowing hand. "I never signed this," Eva said, her voice rising with panic and anger. "I've never even seen this document before. Look at the signature, the capital E is all wrong. I always make my E with a distinctive loop, and this one is too simple, too straight. And the H in Hart, it's supposed to have a flourish. My father taught me something he learned in the army. This is a forgery." Lakota took the document and held it up to the light streaming through the barn slats. "The ink is cheap," he observed. "See how it is spotted and blotted in places? This is not good quality ink. And the paper," he rubbed it between his fingers. "This is new paper, but it has been artificially aged. See the brown stains at the edges? Someone tried to make it look older than it is." "Why?" Eva demanded. "Why go to all this trouble?" "To force you off the land," Lakota said quietly. "The nighttime visits, they were meant to terrify you, to make you think you were losing your mind, so that when you finally fled, no one would question it. And this forged deed would give Malloy legal cover to claim the spring." Before Eva could respond, a sound from outside made them both freeze, the jingle of harness, the creak of saddle leather, and the low murmur of multiple voices. Lakota moved to the barn door with the silence of a hunting cat and peered through a crack between the boards. Eva saw his jaw tighten, saw the muscles in his shoulders coil with tension. "Riders," he said softly. "Many of them. At least 8 men, maybe more. One wears a sheriff's star." Eva joined him at the crack, her heart hammering, and felt her stomach drop. Sheriff Cyrus Rourke sat his horse in the yard, a tall man with a drooping mustache and eyes like chipped flint. He was flanked by 7 deputies, all armed with rifles, all wearing expressions of grim purpose. Behind them, on a black stallion that probably cost more than most homesteaders earned in 5 years, sat Silas Malloy himself, a portly man in expensive clothes, his graying hair slicked back with pomade, his hands glittering with gold rings that caught the morning sun. Rourke held up a paper and read in a voice that carried clearly across the yard. "Eva Hart. By order of the territorial authorities, you are commanded to vacate this property immediately. Legal ownership has been duly transferred to Mr. Silas Malloy through proper deed registration. Furthermore, a warrant has been issued for the arrest of the Lakota known as Lakota on charges of horse theft, kidnapping of a white woman, and assault with intent to cause grievous harm. Both of you are to surrender yourselves immediately, or face the consequences of armed resistance against lawful authority." Eva's blood turned to ice. "That's insane," she breathed. "You saved my life. You haven't stolen anything or hurt anyone. Truth does not matter to men like Rourke." Lakota said quietly, his eyes never leaving the crack in the barn wall. "Only power matters, and right now he has it." His hand found Eva's in the shadows, squeezing once a message of solidarity, of shared danger, of determination. "We must leave. Now. If they take us prisoner, we will never get the chance to prove the truth." "But where can we go?" Eva asked desperately. "They'll hunt us. They control the law." "Then we find someone who values truth more than power," Lakota replied. He pulled her away from the door toward the barn's back exit, a small door that opened onto the creek bed behind the structure. "Dr. Hayes, he witnessed your father's agreement with my uncle. He knows the law, and he is an honest man. They gathered what they could carry, the forged deed, some of the papers from the satchel, and Eva insisted on taking her father's coat, despite Lakota's protest that it would slow them down. "It's evidence," she said firmly, "and it's all I have left of him." They slipped out the barn's back door just as they heard boots hitting the ground. in the front yard heard Rourke's voice raised in anger as he called out for them again. Dakota's paint horse was tethered in the cottonwoods near the creek, and they reached it in a desperate sprint, running low through the tall grass that provided scant cover. Behind them, a shout went up. There by the creek, stop them! A gunshot cracked through the morning air, startlingly loud, and the bullet splintered a cottonwood branch inches from Eva's head, sending bark fragments flying. She gasped, but didn't stop running. Dakota reached the horse, first vaulted into the saddle with the fluid grace of someone who had been riding since childhood, and hauled Eva up behind him in one smooth motion. His arm came around her waist, pulling her tight against his back, as he kicked the horse into a gallop. More gunshots followed them, a ragged volley that spoke of poor marksmanship but terrifying intent. Eva clung to Dakota's waist, her face pressed against his back, feeling the hammer of his heart through the buckskin shirt matching the frantic rhythm of her own. The horse stretched out beneath them, hooves pounding the earth in a drumbeat of desperate flight. They galloped east toward Bluebird Crossing, taking a circuitous route through gullies and creek beds where pursuit would be difficult. Dakota knew this land, had hunted across, it had mapped it in his mind through years of following game trails and water sources. He used every fold of terrain to their advantage, putting distance between themselves and Rourke's posse. Only when they had covered nearly 5 miles and the sound of pursuit had faded behind them, did Dakota finally slow the paint horse to a walk. Both of them were breathing hard, and Eva realized that she was shaking. Not just from fear, but from the adrenaline flooding her system, and the sudden violence of being shot at, hunted like an animal. "Are you hurt?" Dakota asked, his voice rough with exertion. "No," Eva managed. "You know." He guided the horse into a stand of cottonwoods beside a creek where they could rest in concealment while the horse recovered its breath. Dakota dismounted and helped Eva down his hands, steadying her when her legs proved unsteady. For a moment they stood close, his hands on her arms, both of them still breathing hard. "Thank you," Eva whispered. "For getting us out. For believing me, for—" "You do not need to thank me," Dakota interrupted gently. His dark eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "We are in this together now. Your fight is my fight." "Why?" Eva asked the question bursting out of her. "You could leave. You could ride back to your uncle's band and be safe. Why risk your life for a settler woman you barely know?" Dakota was quiet for a long moment, his hands still on her arms, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because your father kept his word when other white men broke theirs," he said finally. "Because the spring belongs to all who honor it, not to whoever has the most guns. Because—" He hesitated, then continued with quiet honesty. "Because when I see you, I do not see a settler woman. I see someone brave fighting for what is right. I see someone worth standing beside." Eva's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. She reached up and placed her hand over his where it rested on her arm, squeezing gently. "Then we stand together," she said. "Whatever comes." "Whatever comes." Dakota agreed. Then with visible reluctance, he released her and moved to check the horse, giving them both space to compose themselves. Eva sank down on a fallen log, her mind racing. They had evidence of forgery, but they were now fugitives. Rourke controlled the law in this county. Malloy had money and influence. How could two people, one a settler woman with no family, the other a Lakota warrior with no legal standing in white man's courts, possibly fight such power? But they had to try. Because if they didn't, her father's death would go unavenged, his promises would be broken, and men like Malloy would continue to seize and destroy until nothing good remained. "We need help," Eva said quietly. "We need someone who understands the law and has the courage to stand against Rourke." "Dr. Hayes." Dakota said, echoing his earlier suggestion. He is respected. He witnessed the original agreement. If we can reach him, explain what we have found, then we have a chance. Eva finished. She stood squaring her shoulders, forcing strength into her spine. Then let's go find him. Bluebird Crossing huddled on the prairie like a handful of dice thrown by an optimistic gambler. The town consisted of perhaps a dozen buildings clustered around a rutted main street, a general store with a false front painted cheerful yellow, a telegraph office run by Annika Lund, a Swedish widow with sharp eyes and sharper opinions, a combination saloon and boarding house called the Lucky Star, with rooms above and a bar below a blacksmith's forge that also served as livery, and Dr. Ephraim Hayes's practice, a two-room frame building at the east end of the street with a painted shingle swinging from a post outside. A handful of homesteaders' wagons stood near the store, and several horses drowsed at the hitching rails. But the town felt subdued, as if people were holding their breath, waiting for trouble to arrive. As Dakota and Eva approached from the rear, keeping to the alleys and back paths, Eva noticed that the streets were quieter than usual for mid-morning. No children played in the dust. The saloon doors were closed. Even the chickens that usually scratched in every yard seemed to have been penned up. Something is wrong, Dakota murmured, reading the same signs. The town is afraid. They tethered the paint horse in a thicket behind the doctor's practice and approached the back door on foot. Dakota moved first his hand on his knife, checking for watchers before signaling Eva to follow. She gathered her skirts and ran the last few yards, heart-hammering, and pressed herself against the wall beside the door, while Dakota knocked 3 times in quick succession. For a long moment, there was no answer, and Eva's heart sank. But then the door swung open, and Dr. Ephraim Hayes stood there looking 10 years older than when Eva had last seen him at her father's funeral. He wore shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, and his wire-rimmed spectacles perched on his nose. And there was a haunted expression in his lined face that spoke of sleepless nights and heavy burdens. His eyes widened when he saw Eva, then fixed on Dakota with a mixture of recognition and wariness. Eva, good Lord, child, what? He caught sight of Dakota, and his expression shifted. Recognition followed by understanding. Come in, he said quickly, glancing over their shoulders to check for observers. Quickly before someone sees you. They stumbled into the practice's back room, which smelled of carbolic acid and dried herbs, and the faint metallic tang of blood. Hayes bolted the door behind them and turned to face them, his expression grave. What Rourke was here 2 hours ago, he said without preamble. He's put out the word that you're a fugitive, Eva, consorting with a hostile Indian who kidnapped you. There's a warrant for Dakota's arrest on charges of horse theft, kidnapping, and assault. And Rourke's made it clear to everyone in town that anyone who helps you will be charged as an accessory. It's all lies, Eva said, her voice shaking with anger. Dakota saved my life, and someone has been terrorizing me for months, pretending to be my father's ghost, and we found evidence. Slow down, Dr. Hayes interrupted, raising a hand. Start from the beginning. Tell me everything. So they did. Eva spoke rapidly, her words tumbling over each other as she described the nighttime intruder, the filed latch, the bruises, the feeling of going slowly mad from fear and sleep deprivation. Dakota filled in details with terse factual observations about the boot prints, the coat in the barn, the coal oil stains. They spread their evidence on Hayes's examination table, the forged deed, the papers from the satchel, the cavalry coat with its telltale blood stain. Dr. Hayes examined each item with the focused intensity he normally reserved for diagnosing disease. He held the forged deed up to the window's light, squinting through his spectacles at the signature and the ink. The signature is wrong, he confirmed, after a long moment, his voice heavy with certainty. I've witnessed Eva's signature on legal documents before the property tax forms the water rights agreements. She has a distinctive capital E, with a pronounced loop almost flamboyant. This signature is much simpler, more masculine in its strokes. And the ink. He touched a fingertip very carefully to a blotted letter and frowned. This is cheap iron gall ink, probably mixed with lampblack by someone without proper training. It's spotted and uneven, and it's already beginning to fade. Benjamin Hart always used good quality ink ordered from back east. Never cheap stuff like this. So it's forged, Eva said, though she'd known that from the moment she saw it. Hearing Dr. Hayes confirm it made it real, made it evidence. Unquestionably, Dr. Hayes said. He set the deed down and picked up the cavalry coat, examining it with the same careful attention. When he reached the blood stain on the shoulder, his expression darkened. He brought the coat closer to the lamp on his desk and peered at the stain intently. This blood is old, at least 4 months, judging by the oxidation and the way it's set into the fiber. And the location right shoulder, about where a man's head would rest if he were lying down or collapsed. He stopped abruptly, his face going pale. He set the coat down with trembling hands and moved to his desk, unlocking a drawer with a key from his vest pocket. From the drawer, he extracted a thin notebook bound in brown leather, its pages worn from frequent handling. "What is that?" Eva asked. "My private medical notes." Dr. Hayes said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not the official reports I file with the county, those go through Rourke's office. And I have to write what he allows me to write. These are my personal observations, my real diagnoses, the things I see but cannot always say." His hands shook slightly as he opened the notebook to a page marked with a black ribbon. "From the day I examined your father's body." Eva took the notebook with hands that had started trembling. Lakota moved to stand beside her, reading over her shoulder, and together they read Dr. Hayes's cramped, precise handwriting. September 15th, 1878. Examined body of Colonel Benjamin Hart at request of Sheriff Cyrus Rourke. Body found at base of cottonwood tree approximately 200 yards from Hart Spring. Official cause of death per Rourke. Broken neck from fall off horse during early morning ride. However, I note the following medical inconsistencies that trouble me greatly. Contusion on posterior skull approximately 2 inches above the occipital bone, roughly circular, approximately 1.5 inches in diameter. Pattern is consistent with blow from cylindrical blunt object axe handle walking stick. Tool handle rather than impact with irregular ground surface or tree root. Edges of contusion are sharply defined, suggesting single forceful blow rather than multiple impacts from tumbling. 2. Neck fracture is at C2 vertebra clean and sharp transverse break. However, angle of fracture is inconsistent with natural fall, appears to have been caused by sudden violent twisting force applied while subject was already unconscious or severely impaired, possibly to ensure death after initial blow failed to kill immediately. 3. Found near body uncorked laudanum bottle bearing my own practice label, nearly empty, only residue remaining. Colonel Hart was not known to use laudanum recreationally. In fact, he specifically refused it 2 years ago when I offered it for severe back pain, saying he preferred to keep his wits clear. Presence of bottle highly suspicious. 4. Small wood splinters embedded in scalp wound, which I carefully removed and preserved. Wood appears to be hickory based on grain pattern and color. Splinters are fresh, not weathered, suggesting recent contact with implement. 5. Lividity patterns suggest body was moved after death. Blood pooling indicates he died lying on left side, but body was found on back. Medical conclusion. All evidence points to homicide staged to appear as accidental death. Victim was likely drugged with laudanum, possibly mixed with alcohol, to mask bitter taste struck from behind with hickory implement, then neck broken to ensure death. Body subsequently positioned to simulate fall from horse. I reported these concerns verbally to Sheriff Rourke at the scene. Rourke became extremely agitated and told me in no uncertain terms that I was seeing things that aren't there, and that if I valued my medical license and my position in this community, I would file a standard accident report and stop making trouble. He specifically threatened to have me investigated for medical malpractice and fraud if I pursued the matter, noting that he had friends in the Territorial Medical Board. I am ashamed to say, I complied with his demands out of fear. I am an old man with no family, no protection, and I depend on my practice to survive. But I kept these notes because I knew that Benjamin Hart was murdered. And I hoped that someday someone would have the courage to bring his killers to justice. The wood splinters are preserved in a sealed vial labeled and dated stored in my locked cabinet. If the murder weapon is ever found, these splinters can be matched to it definitively. May God forgive me for my cowardice. E. Hayes, M.D. Eva's hands trembled so violently, she nearly dropped the notebook. Tears streamed down her face, tears of grief, rage, and vindication. "You knew," she whispered. "All this time you knew my father was murdered, and you said nothing." "I had suspicions, not proof, that would stand up in court." Dr. Hayes set his voice tight with shame and self-loathing. "And Rourke made it absolutely clear that if I caused trouble, I wouldn't just lose my license, I'd have an accident, just like your father. Maybe a fall from my horse, maybe a heart attack in my sleep." Rourke didn't say it explicitly, but the threat was unmistakable. He removed his spectacles and rubbed his eyes wearily. "I'm an old man, Ava. I was afraid. I chose my own survival over justice for your father, and I've lived with that shame every day since." Ava wanted to be angry with him, wanted to rage at his cowardice, but she couldn't. She understood fear. She'd lived with it every night for 4 months. "You're telling us now," she said finally. "That takes courage." "Better late than never," Dr. Hayes said bitterly. He crossed to his locked medicine cabinet and withdrew a small glass vial containing tiny wood fragments. "These are the splinters I removed from your father's skull wound. If we can find the weapon that killed him and match these splinters to it, we'll have scientific proof of murder that even a corrupt court can't ignore." "Where would Rourke keep such a weapon?" Lakota asked, speaking for the first time since they'd entered. His voice was quiet but intense, his dark eyes fixed on the vial as if it held the key to everything. "His office, possibly," Dr. Hayes said. "Or his home. Or he destroyed it, that's what I've always assumed. A smart murderer would burn a wooden implement or throw it in a river. But..." He hesitated, then continued slowly. "But men like Rourke are arrogant. And sometimes they keep trophies or evidence they can use as leverage. If Malloy ordered the killing, Rourke might have kept the weapon as insurance against Malloy betraying him. A devil's bargain," Ava said, remembering the phrase from her father's books on military strategy. "Exactly," Dr. Hayes confirmed. "If Rourke has evidence that implicates Malloy, and Malloy knows it, then neither man dares move against the other. It's a devil's bargain. But it might mean the weapon still exists." Dakota's expression was thoughtful. "Rourke's office in town, is it guarded?" "Not usually during the day when Rourke is out on patrol," Dr. Hayes said. "But after this morning, after you two became fugitives, he'll have doubled security. He'll be expecting you to try something." "Then we must be unexpected," Lakota said simply. Before they could discuss specifics, a sharp knock on the front door made them all freeze. Dr. Hayes moved swiftly to the window and peered through the gap in the curtains, then returned with his face even paler than before. "Rourke," he said tersely. "And 4 deputies. They're going to search the building." Eva's heart plummeted. They'd come so far, learned so much, and now they were trapped like animals in a snare. Dakota's eyes swept the room with the focused intensity of a warrior assessing terrain. He spotted the trapdoor in the corner, half hidden under a faded rag rug that had seen better days. Without a word, he kicked the rug aside and hauled the trapdoor open, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. "Root cellar," Dr. Hayes confirmed. "For storing medicines that need cold temperatures. Go, now, I'll stall them." Ava grabbed the notebook and the vial of wood splinters, tucking them into her bodice where they'd be safe. Dakota gathered the forged deed, and the coat then descended the ladder quickly. Ava followed, and the trapdoor closed above them, with a soft thump plunging them into musty darkness. The cellar was cramped and damp, smelling of earth and mold, and the sharp medicinal odor of preserved compounds. Eva could see nothing at first, but gradually her eyes adjusted to the faint light that filtered through cracks between the floorboards overhead. She could make out Dakota's form beside her, pressed close in the confined space, and she felt his hand find hers in the darkness, squeezing once in silent solidarity. Above them, heavy boots stomped across the floorboards. The front door crashed open with a violence that spoke of barely controlled rage. "Doc, we need to search your place." Rourke's voice harsh and aggressive, carrying clearly through the thin floorboards. "Official business. You have a warrant." Dr. Hayes's voice was remarkably calm, professionally neutral. "Don't need one for a fugitive pursuit. That Indian kidnapped Eva Hart, and she's consorting with him, probably under duress, probably not in her right mind. For her own safety, we need to find her." "Eva Hart is a sensible, educated woman with a strong will of her own," Dr. Hayes replied evenly. "If she's with someone, I doubt very much it's under duress." "You calling me a liar, Doc?" Rourke's voice dropped to a dangerous purr. "I'm saying I haven't seen her, which is the truth. Now, do you have actual business with me, or are you here to disrupt my practice?" Footsteps moved through the building, systematic and thorough. Doors slammed open. Ava heard glass breaking. Rourke's men weren't being careful with Hayes's medical supplies. Drawers were yanked out and emptied, their contents clattering to the floor. The search was deliberately destructive, meant to punish and intimidate as much as to find them. Eva's heart hammered so hard, she was certain it must be audible above. Dakota's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close against his side, his other hand moving to rest on the knife at his belt. If the trap door opened, they would have to fight, and they would lose outnumbered and trapped in a hole with no escape route. The footsteps moved directly overhead, and Eva held her breath. Through the crack between boards, she could see the shadow of a man standing right above them. "What's under the rug in the back room?" A deputy's voice, younger than Rourke's. "Root cellar." Dr. Hayes replied, his voice steady but with an undertone of tension. "I store medicines down there, morphine, laudanum compounds that need to stay cool. I'd appreciate it if you didn't disturb them. Replacing medical supplies out here costs a fortune, and I depend on those stores for emergencies." A long, tense silence. Ava's lungs burned with the need to breathe, but she didn't dare not even the smallest inhale. Beside her, Dakota was utterly still, barely breathing himself, every muscle coiled like a spring ready to release. "Check it," Rourke ordered. Footsteps approached. The rug scraped across the floor above them. Eva's hand tightened convulsively on Dakota's, her nails digging into his palm. But he didn't flinch. His fingers laced through hers, holding firm, anchoring her. The trapdoor creaked as someone gripped the iron ring set into it. "Wait." Dr. Hayes's voice sharp now. "If you open that door, you'll let warm air into the cellar and potentially ruin $100 worth of temperature-sensitive compounds. I have morphine down there, Cyrus. You know what morphine costs. If you destroy it with your carelessness, You'll answer to every homesteader in the county who needs it for surgery or childbirth. Is that what you want? Another long pause. Then Rourke's voice, grudging. Fine. Leave it. But I'm warning you, Doc, if I find out you're harboring fugitives, you'll be charged as an accessory. That's a hanging offense. I'm well aware of the law, Sheriff, Dr. Hayes replied coolly. Now, if you're finished destroying my practice, I have patients to attend. The footsteps moved away. The door slammed. But Eva and Dakota remained frozen in the darkness for long minutes, not daring to move, waiting for the trap to spring. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes, the trap door lifted, and Dr. Hayes's face appeared lined and weary in the lamplight. They're gone, he said quietly. But they'll be watching. And Eva, I need to tell you something else. They climbed out of the cellar, stiff and shaking. Eva's legs nearly gave way when she tried to stand, and Dakota steadied her with a hand under her elbow. Darkars. Hayes had already begun cleaning up the destruction Rourke's men had left behind. Broken bottles, scattered papers, medical instruments thrown carelessly on the floor. What is it? Eva asked, dreading another revelation. What else haven't you told me? Dr. Hayes moved to his desk and sat heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 60 years. Your father came to see me 2 days before he died, he said quietly. He said he'd discovered something about the water usage at Hart Spring, something that didn't add up. He'd been keeping those careful records you mentioned, tracking flow rates and usage patterns. And he noticed that the spring's flow had decreased significantly over the summer, but the amount of water being used downstream had increased. That doesn't make sense, Eva said, her mind trying to work through the implications. If the spring flow decreased, downstream usage should decrease too. Exactly, Dr. Hayes said, unless someone was diverting water illegally before it reached the regular measurement points. Your father suspected Malloy had built an illegal sluice somewhere on the northern side of the ridge, tapping into the underground source before it even reached the main spring basin. If that's true, Malloy has been stealing water for months, maybe years. Water that should have been available to everyone with rights to the spring. Dakota spoke up, his voice sharp. My uncle's band noticed the spring running lower this summer. We thought it was drought. If Malloy has been stealing water, then he's been violating the treaty agreement and stealing from both settler homesteaders and Lakota bands. Dr. Hayes finished. And your father was about to expose him. Benjamin told me he was going to ride the ridge the next day, find the sluice, and then report it to the territorial marshal. He asked me to witness a formal complaint he was drafting. And then he died. Eva said, her voice hollow. And then he died. Dr. Hayes confirmed. I didn't put it together at the time. I was focused on the medical evidence and Rourke's threats. But now, looking back, the timing is too convenient. Malloy needed Benjamin dead before he could find that sluice and file his report. So Malloy ordered the killing and Rourke carried it out. Dakota said, fitting the pieces together. And then they terrorized Eva with the nightly visits, hoping she would flee the property in fear. When she didn't, they prepared a forged deed to seize the land legally. A plan with multiple contingencies, Dr. Hayes said grimly. If fear doesn't work, use false law. And if anyone questions the deed, they control the sheriff and can suppress opposition. Eva felt rage building inside her, hot and cleansing, burning away the fear she'd carried for so long. We need to find that sluice, she said. If we can prove Malloy has been stealing water, we can establish motive for murder. Combined with your medical evidence and the forged deed, we'd have a case that even corrupt authorities couldn't ignore. But first, we need to get out of town without being caught. Dakota pointed out practically. Rourke will have men watching. The telegraph office. Dr. Hayes said suddenly. Annika Lund. She's honest, and she has no love for Rourke. He arrested her son last year on trumped-up charges. If we can get a message to the territorial marshal through her, tell them what we've discovered. Then we force the authorities to investigate before Malloy can cover his tracks. Eva finished. Yes. But how do we reach Annika without being seen? Lakota moved to the window and studied the street with a scout's attention to detail. The telegraph office is 3 buildings down on the opposite side of the street. The back entrance faces the alley where our horse is tethered. If we go now, while the street is quiet. Too risky in daylight, Dr. Hayes interrupted. Wait until after dark. In the meantime, I'll spread word quietly to people I trust, Walter Finch, Charlotte Blake, that you need help. Build support before you make your move. It was sound advice, but waiting felt like torture. Eva spent the afternoon helping Dr. Hayes reorganize his practice, while Lakota kept watch and every minute dragged like an hour. She cleaned broken glass and reshelved medicines, and tried not to think about what would happen if they failed, if Rourke caught them before they could send their message. As afternoon faded toward evening, Dr. Hayes prepared food, simple fare bread and cheese and dried apples. But Eva was so hungry, she barely tasted it. Lakota ate sparingly, his attention divided between the food and the street outside, always watching, always alert. Tell me about your uncle, Eva said quietly, partly to distract herself from the waiting, partly because she genuinely wanted to know. About the agreement he made with my father. Lakota's expression softened slightly. Wicasa is a wise man, he said. He was young when the treaties were signed, when our people were promised land and hunting rights that would last forever. He watched those promises broken again and again. So when your father approached him 6 years ago and offered to share the spring, Wicasa was suspicious. He thought it was another trick, another false promise. But my father convinced him, Eva prompted. Your father spoke plainly, Lakota said. He said, I cannot control what other white men do, but I can control what I do. This spring has been here longer than any of us. It does not belong to me or to you, it belongs to itself. But we both depend on it, so we should share it fairly. Wicasa respected that honesty. So they made the agreement, and your father kept his word. Every summer when my uncle's band came to the spring, your father would welcome them. He learned some of our language. He taught me some English. Us. He paused, choosing words carefully. We trusted him. Trust is rare between our peoples. And now I'm trying to honor that trust, Eva said. But I feel like I'm failing. Like I'm not strong enough, not smart enough. You are strong enough, Lakota interrupted firmly. He turned to face her fully, his dark eyes intense. You have faced terror every night for months, and you did not break. You are fighting against men with power and weapons, and you are still standing. Your father would be proud. Eva felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them away. I'm only standing because you're helping me. Then we stand together, Lakota said simply. His hand found hers on the table between them, his calloused fingers warm and strong. As partners, as... He hesitated, then continued quietly. As more than partners, perhaps, if we survive this. Eva's breath caught. She turned her hand in his, their palms pressing together, and felt something shift between them. Something that had been building since that first night, by the fire growing stronger through shared danger and trust. When we survive this, she corrected softly. Not if. When. Lakota's thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture so gentle it made her heart ache. When, he agreed. Dr. Hayes cleared his throat discreetly from across the room, and they pulled apart, but a promise hung between them, unspoken but real. As darkness finally fell over Bluebird Crossing, the 3 of them made their final preparations. Dr. Hayes gave Eva his medical notes and the vial of wood splinters. "Keep these safe," he said. "They're your insurance. If anything happens to me, these notes can still convict Rourke." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Eva said firmly. "Nevertheless," Dr. Hayes replied. He pressed her hand briefly. "Be careful, both of you." They slipped out the back door into darkness. The moon was only a sliver, providing barely enough light to see by, and thick clouds obscured even that. Perfect for stealth if they could avoid stumbling. Lakota led the way, moving with the silent efficiency of a hunter, and Eva followed, gathering her skirts to keep them from rustling. They reached the telegraph office's back door without incident. Lakota tested it, carefully locked. He pulled a thin knife from his boot and worked the simple latch, and after a moment, it clicked open. They slipped inside, closing the door silently behind them. The office was dark except for a single lamp burning at the front desk, where Annika Lund sat working on paperwork. She looked up as they entered, her hand dropping to something under the desk, probably a pistol, then relaxed slightly when she recognized Eva. "Miss Hart," she said in her slight Swedish accent. "I wondered when you would come." "You know about the warrant?" Eva asked. "The whole town knows," Annika replied. "Rourke has been making speeches in the saloon, claiming you've been deceived by a savage, that you need to be rescued." Her lip curled with contempt. "No one with sense believes him. Your father was a good man, and everyone knows Malloy has wanted that spring for years. Then you'll help us." Eva felt hope kindle. "What do you need?" Annika asked simply. "Send a message to the territorial marshal." Eva said, pulling out Dr. Hayes's notebook and showing Annika the key page. "Tell them we have medical evidence that Colonel Benjamin Hart was murdered by Sheriff Cyrus Rourke at the direction of Silas Malloy. Tell them we have a forged deed, proof of fraud, and evidence of water theft. Ask them to send marshals immediately to investigate." Annika's eyes widened as she read Hayes's notes. This is explosive. If this gets out, that's why we need you to send it to multiple destinations." Lakota interrupted. "The marshal, yes, but also newspapers. Make it public so Rourke and Malloy cannot suppress it." Annika nodded slowly. "I can do that. But once I send this, Rourke will know. He'll come here, and he'll destroy my telegraph key to stop any more messages." "Can you send it now?" Eva asked urgently, "before he realizes we're here?" "I can try," Annika said. She sat at her telegraph key, her fingers poised over the brass mechanism. "This will take several minutes. The message is long, and I'll need to repeat it to multiple stations. Can you keep watch?" "Yes," Lakota said. He moved to the front window, staying in shadow, his eyes scanning the dark street. Annika's fingers began to dance across the key, tapping out the urgent message in crisp, efficient Morse code. The key clicked and chattered, a sound that seemed terribly loud in the quiet night. Eva watched the words disappear into the wire, racing across the territory at lightning speed, carrying the truth faster than horses or lies could travel. "Urgent stop murder investigation required. Stop Colonel Benjamin Hart, killed by Sheriff Cyrus Rourke, on orders of Silas Malloy. Stop medical evidence of blunt force trauma. Stop forged deed to seize property. Stop water theft. Documented stop. Send territorial marshal immediately to Bluebird Crossing. Stop." Annika sent the message once, then began again, routing it to a different destination. The telegraph office in Devil's Gate. Then again to a newspaper in Bismarck. Each repetition took precious minutes, and Eva felt her nerves stretching tighter with each passing second. "Annika," Lakota said quietly from the window. "Company." Eva's heart sank. She moved to join him and saw what he'd spotted: figures moving in the darkness, at least 4 men converging on the telegraph office from both ends of the street. They'd been discovered. "How much more time do you need?" Eva asked Annika urgently. 2 more minutes, Annika said, her fingers never stopping their rapid work. Almost done. The front door rattled. A fist pounded on it. "Annika Lund, open up sheriff's business." "I'm closed for the night," Annika called back, still typing. "Come back in the morning. Open this door or we'll break it down." Annika, Eva started. "Almost there," Annika breathed. Her fingers flew even faster, hammering out the last few words of the message to the newspaper. "Just..." The door burst open with a crash of splintering wood. 2 deputies charged in, guns drawn, and behind them came Sheriff Cyrus Rourke, his face twisted with rage. "Step away from that key," Rourke roared. Annika's hand stabbed down on the key one last time, sending the final confirmation. "Message sent," she said calmly. "All of it. To 3 different destinations. The truth is out now, Sheriff, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Rourke's face went purple. He lunged forward and brought his revolver down hard on the telegraph key, smashing it into fragments of brass and broken wood. Sparks flew, and the sudden silence when the clicking stopped was deafening. "You're under arrest," Rourke snarled at Annika. "Aiding fugitives, transmitting false information, treason against lawful authority." "Treason?" Annika laughed, a sharp, defiant sound. "I transmitted the truth, and you can't arrest the truth, Sheriff." Rourke backhanded her across the face, and Annika's head snapped to the side. Eva cried out in protest, but Dakota grabbed her arm, holding her back. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Any move now would be suicide. "Grab them," Rourke ordered his deputies, jerking his chin toward Eva and Dakota. "All 3 go to jail, and someone ride to Malloy's ranch, tell him we have a problem." The deputies advanced, and Dakota's hand went to his knife. Eva saw him calculating odds, saw the moment he decided to fight rather than be taken. And then Dr. Hayes's voice rang out from the doorway behind the deputies. "Stop right there, Cyrus." Everyone turned. Dr. Hayes stood in the doorway, and he wasn't alone. Behind him were Walter Finch and his 2 grown sons, all carrying rifles. Charlotte Blake was there too, holding a Spencer rifle, with the competence of someone who knew exactly how to use it. And others townspeople Eva recognized, farmers and shopkeepers and ordinary citizens who had apparently decided they'd had enough of Rourke's corruption. "This has gone far enough," Walter Finch said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd worked this land for 30 years and commanded respect. "We've all heard the stories. We know Malloy's been pressuring people to sell. No, Rourke's been looking the other way when Malloy's men cause trouble. Now we hear there's evidence of murder, and we're done pretending we don't see what's happening. You're interfering with a lawful arrest." Rourke blustered, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. "You're making an unlawful arrest," Dr. Hayes countered. "And we're exercising our rights as citizens to demand accountability. Eva Hart and her companion will be taken into protective custody by this vigilance committee until the territorial marshal arrives to investigate. You, Sheriff, will wait here and answer questions when the marshal comes. And if I refuse..." Rourke's hand tightened on his revolver. "Then we'll see how many of your deputies want to start a shooting war with half the town," Walter said grimly. "Your choice, Cyrus." For a long moment, tension crackled in the air, like lightning before a storm. Rourke's deputies exchanged uncertain glances, clearly unwilling to fire on neighbors and friends. Slowly, reluctantly, they lowered their weapons. "This isn't over," Rourke snarled, but he holstered his revolver and stepped back. Walter nodded to Eva and Dakota. "Come with us. You'll be safe until the marshal arrives." They fled the telegraph office, surrounded by their unexpected protectors, and Ava felt tears of relief and gratitude streaming down her face. They weren't alone anymore. The truth was out, and people were willing to stand for it. But as they reached the relative safety of Walter Finch's farm outside town, Charlotte Blake pulled Ava aside. "The telegraph message was sent," she said quietly. "But it will take 3 days, maybe 4, for the territorial marshal to reach us from Bismarck. And Malloy has 40 men at his ranch. If he decides to act before the marshal arrives, then we need to be ready to defend ourselves." Ava finished. "Where would he strike?" Hart Spring, Lakota said, joining them. He'd been thinking along the same lines. "If we control the spring, we control the evidence, the illegal sluice, the site of the murder. Malloy will try to destroy anything that ties him to the killing." "Then we go there first," Eva said. "Tonight, we secure the site and we wait." "That's suicide," Charlotte protested. "Malloy has an army." "And we have the truth," Eva replied. "And people willing to fight for it. How many Walter Finch considered? I can muster maybe 15 men willing to stand. Maybe 20 if we include everyone who's fed up with Malloy. But against 40 trained ranch hands. Numbers are not everything." Lakota said quietly, "We have terrain. We have preparation. And they will be attacking, not defending. Defenders always have advantage if they use it wisely." Eva looked around at the faces gathered in Walter's kitchen, ordinary people, farmers and shopkeepers and townspeople, none of them soldiers or gunfighters, but all of them determined to stand against injustice. Her father would have been proud. "Then we make our stand at Hart Spring," she said, "and we hold until the marshal arrives. Together." Lakota added his hand, finding hers in the lamplight. "Together," Eva agreed, and as they began preparing for the battle to come, Eva felt something she hadn't felt in months, not just hope, but certainty. They would win this. Because the truth was worth fighting for, and they had found the courage to stand for it. They reached Hart Spring just after midnight, a group of 23 souls armed with whatever they could carry: rifles, shotguns, revolvers, even a few hunting bows. Walter Finch had brought his 2 sons, both strapping young men in their 20s. Charlotte Blake insisted on coming despite Eva's protests. Dr. Hayes came too, bringing his medical bag and a grim determination to see this through. Joseph, a half-Lakota tracker who had worked with Colonel Hart years ago, appeared out of the darkness, leading 3 more Lakota warriors, cousins of Lakota, who had heard of the trouble and come to honor the old agreement. The spring site itself offered natural defensive advantages. The basin sat at the base of a low ridge surrounded by cottonwoods and willows that provided cover. The stone cache Eva's father had built years ago for ammunition storage became their command post, 8 feet across, with thick walls that would stop bullets positioned to give clear sight lines of anyone approaching the spring. "They will come at dawn," Lakota predicted, surveying the terrain with a warrior's eye. "Malloy will want to strike before word spreads further, before more people join us." "Then we have a few hours to prepare," Walter said. "We need to make every advantage count." They worked through the night by moonlight, preparing defenses with the materials at hand. Joseph showed them how to create false positions, hats on sticks, coats stuffed with grass to look like sentries to make their numbers appear larger. Lakota and his cousins set traps in the approach's deadfalls that would crash down on unwary riders, tripwires stretched across the cottonwood grove. Charlotte Blake, who had taught school on the frontier for 12 years and survived more than one Indian raid on her building, supervised the distribution of ammunition and weapons, making sure everyone knew their firing positions and fields of responsibility. Ava worked alongside them all, her exhaustion forgotten in the urgency of preparation. As false dawn began to gray the eastern sky, she found herself standing by the spring with Lakota, both of them taking a brief moment of respite before the storm. "We should talk about what happens after," Lakota said quietly. "If we survive." "When we survive," Ava corrected using his own words from before. "What did you want to say?" Lakota took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in that gesture she had come to treasure. "I want to court you properly," he said, "with my uncle's blessing and your agreement. I want—" He hesitated, then continued with quiet intensity. "I want a future with you, Ava Hart, if you will have me." Ava's heart swelled. "I want that too," she whispered. More than anything. They had no more time for words. The sound of hoofbeats carried across the pre-dawn stillness, many horses moving at a walk, trying for stealth. Lakota squeezed her hand once, then released her and moved to his position. Ava checked her revolver, her hand steady now, and took her place in the stone cache beside Dr. Hayes. The riders came with the sunrise, materializing out of the morning mist like ghosts. Ava counted at least 35 men, all armed, spreading out to surround the spring. At their head rode Silas Malloy on his black stallion, and beside him Sheriff Cyrus Rourke, his face set in hard lines of determination. Malloy raised his hand, and the riders stopped just outside rifle range. "Ava Hart," he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the open ground. "I know you're in there. You're surrounded and outgunned. This is your last chance to surrender peacefully. Come out now, hand over that forged evidence you claim to have, and I'll see to it that you're treated fairly." "You mean you'll see to it that I have an accident just like my father?" Ava shouted back. "We've sent the truth to the Territorial Marshal Malloy. They know you murdered my father. They know about the illegal sluice, the stolen water, the forged deed. It's over. Nothing's over until I say it's over." Malloy roared, his composure cracking. "You're a hysterical girl who's been deceived by a savage. No one will believe your lies." "We'll see about that," Walter Finch called out from his position. "The truth is coming, Malloy. In 3 days the marshal will be here. Can you kill all of us before then? Can you kill the whole territory?" There was a long, tense silence. Then Malloy made a sharp gesture, and his men began to advance, walking their horses forward in a loose skirmish line. Rifles raised. "Hold fire," Lakota said quietly, his voice carrying to all their positions. "Wait for my signal. Make every shot count." The advancing line drew closer. 50 yards. 40. Eva's heart hammered, but her hands were steady on her revolver. Beside her, Dr. Hayes had an old army rifle propped on the stone wall, his jaw set with determination. 30 yards. 25. "Now!" Lakota shouted. The defenders opened fire in a ragged volley. The effect was devastating at close range. 3 of Malloy's men went down immediately, 1 dead and 2 wounded. Horses screamed and reared. The advancing line broke in confusion as riders sought cover. Malloy's men returned fire, a thunder of gunshots that hammered the stone walls and sent bullets whining through the trees. But the defenders had chosen their positions well, using natural cover, and the hasty return fire was poorly aimed. "Reload," Walter called out. "Pick your targets. Don't waste ammunition." The battle settled into a grim pattern, surges and retreats, gunfire, and reload, the acrid smell of powder smoke hanging heavy in the still morning air. Malloy's men tried to flank them twice, working through the cottonwood grove. But Lakota's traps caught them. A deadfall crushed one man's leg, tripwires sent others sprawling, and the Lakota warriors' arrows struck silently from unexpected angles. As the sun climbed higher, Ava realized they were actually holding. Malloy's numerical advantage was being negated by their prepared positions and superior knowledge of the terrain. But their ammunition wouldn't last forever. She counted her remaining bullets, 6 rounds in the revolver, no more. Then the dynamics changed. One of Malloy's men, bolder or more desperate than the rest, made a dash for the barn, carrying a torch. He reached it and flung the torch onto the roof before anyone could stop him. Within minutes, flames were licking up the dry wood and old thatch. "They're trying to smoke us out," Charlotte shouted. "Or destroy evidence," Dr. Hayes said grimly. "If they burn everything, they can claim whatever story they want." "We need to stop them," Ava said desperately. But before anyone could move, a new sound cut through the chaos, hoofbeats from the north and voices raised in challenge. Ava's heart leapt as she saw figures cresting the ridge, Lakota warriors, at least 15 of them, led by an older man with long gray braids. Dakota's uncle Wikasa had arrived with reinforcements. The warriors charged down the slope with ululating war cries, not firing their weapons, but making their presence known in a way that could not be ignored. They weren't attacking Malloy's men directly, but their arrival changed the situation completely. Suddenly, this wasn't just a dispute over a homestead. It was a potential treaty violation, an incident that could bring federal troops and investigators. Malloy's men began to waver, looking to their employer for direction. They were hired cowboys, not soldiers, and fighting a defensive homestead was one thing. Fighting both settlers and Lakota warriors defending treaty rights was another matter entirely. Then Sheriff Cyrus Rourke made a decision that sealed his fate. Seeing his plan collapsing, seeing the witnesses multiplying, he spurred his horse directly toward the stone cache where Eva and Dr. Hayes were positioned, his revolver raised. "If I'm going down, you're coming with me," he roared. Dakota, seeing the charge, moved without thinking. He burst from cover and ran to intercept Rourke, his Winchester raised. He fired once, twice. The first shot missed. The second took Rourke's horse in the chest. The animal collapsed mid-stride, throwing Rourke hard from the saddle. But Rourke rolled as he landed, coming up with his revolver, aiming not at Dakota, but at Eva, who had risen from cover to see what was happening. "No." Dakota's shout was raw with desperation. He threw himself between Eva and Rourke just as the sheriff fired. The bullet that was meant for Eva's heart struck Dakota in the left shoulder, instead the impact spinning him around. He went down hard, blood already spreading dark across his shirt. Eva screamed. She fired her revolver twice, both shots hitting Rourke once in the arm, once in the side. The sheriff dropped his gun and collapsed, gasping, his face gray with shock and pain. Eva fell to her knees beside Dakota, her hands pressing desperately against the wound in his shoulder, trying to stem the bleeding. "Stay with me," she gasped, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Dakota, stay with me. Don't you dare die." "I am here." Dakota managed his voice, strained but conscious. "I am not leaving you." Dr. Hayes was there in seconds, his medical bag already open. He examined the wound with swift, practiced movements. "Bullet went clean through," he announced. "Missed the bone and the major vessels. He'll live, but he needs proper care immediately." Around them, the battle was ending. Malloy, seeing Rourke down and the situation hopeless, tried to flee. He wheeled his black stallion and spurred toward the open prairie, but one of the Lakota warriors, Tokola Dakota's cousin, raised his rifle and fired. The shot was precise, striking not Malloy, but the ground directly in front of his horse. The animal reared in panic, throwing Malloy from the saddle. He landed in an ungraceful heap, the wind knocked from him, and before he could rise, Walter Finch and his sons were on him, dragging him upright and binding his hands. The remaining hired guns, seeing both their employers captured, threw down their weapons and raised their hands. The fight was over. Eva, kneeling in the dirt beside Dakota with blood on her hands and tears streaming down her face, barely registered the victory. All that mattered was the man beneath her hands, his face pale, but his eyes open, focused on her with an intensity that made her heart ache. "You saved my life," she whispered. "You saved mine first." Dakota replied, managing a weak smile. "On that runaway wagon, I am simply returning the favor." "You're an idiot," Eva said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes," Dakota agreed, "but I am your idiot, if you will still have me." "Always," Eva promised. And despite Dr. Hayes working on Dakota's shoulder, despite the chaos around them, she leaned down and kissed him, fierce and desperate, and full of all the emotion she'd been holding back. When she pulled back, Dakota's eyes were bright despite the pain. "That is good," he said softly, "because I am not going anywhere." As Dr. Hayes worked to clean and bandage the wound properly, Wikasa approached with his warriors. The old man looked down at Dakota with an expression that mixed pride and exasperation. "You are brave," Wikasa said in Lakota, which Dakota translated quietly for Eva, even in his weakened state. "But you are also foolish. Your father would have words for you about throwing yourself at bullets." "My father would understand," Dakota replied in the same language. "I was protecting what matters." Wikasa's eyes shifted to Eva, and his expression softened. He spoke again, and Dakota translated, "My uncle says you have honored my father's memory. You have fought for the spring and for the promise. He says you are welcome among our people, and that when I am healed, he will give his blessing to our union." Eva felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were tears of gratitude and joy. "Tell him thank you," she said. "Tell him I will honor the agreement my father made, and I will spend my life proving worthy of his trust." Dakota translated, and Wikasa nodded gravely. Then he did something unexpected. He reached down and gently touched Eva's head in a gesture of blessing and acceptance. No words were needed. The territorial marshals arrived 4 days later, but by then the situation was well in hand. Rourke and Malloy were both in custody, held under guard by Walter Finch and a rotating group of armed townspeople who had appointed themselves a citizen's watch. The illegal sluice had been found on the northern ridge, exactly where Colonel Hart had suspected a sophisticated diversion system that had been stealing nearly a third of the spring's flow. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The trial took place in Devil's Gate 3 weeks later and became territorial news. Eva testified, her voice steady and clear, as she described her father's dedication to fair water sharing, the terror campaign waged against her, and the evidence they had uncovered. Gunfire. Ephraim Hayes's testimony was devastating. He presented his medical notes in precise, damning detail, explaining how the wound pattern on Colonel Hart's skull matched the dimensions of a hickory walking stick found hidden in Rourke's house. The wood splinters Hayes had preserved were analyzed by a territorial expert who confirmed they came from that exact implement. Dakota testified as well, his arm still in a sling, but his bearing proud and dignified as he spoke about the Lakota's treaty rights to the spring and the importance of promises kept between peoples. His testimony helped establish that Malloy's water theft had harmed not just settler homesteaders, but also indigenous peoples with legal treaty rights, making the offense a federal matter. Annika Lund produced copies of the telegraph messages she had sent, proving that she had transmitted truthful information about a legitimate crime. Her testimony about Rourke destroying federal telegraph equipment added another charge to his growing list of offenses. The defense tried to paint Eva as mentally unstable, grief-stricken, and easily manipulated. They tried to dismiss Dakota as an unreliable savage whose testimony couldn't be trusted. But the sheer weight of evidence, physical, documentary, testimonial, and scientific, overwhelmed every objection. The jury, composed of homesteaders and townspeople who knew what frontier justice really meant, deliberated for less than 2 hours. Cyrus Rourke was sentenced to hang for the murder of Colonel Benjamin Hart. The sentence was carried out on a cold December morning, and Eva did not attend as she had no desire to watch a man die, even a man who had killed her father. Justice had been served. That was enough. Silas Malloy, who had cooperated with authorities and testified against Rourke in hopes of leniency, received 25 years in the territorial prison. His ranch and assets were seized to pay restitution to those he had defrauded. Hart Spring was officially recognized as shared property under the original agreement. The territorial court issued a formal order confirming Eva Hart as primary steward with full Lakota access, guaranteed in perpetuity. A fair use roster was established for neighboring homesteaders overseen by a 3-person committee, Walter Finch representing the settler community, Wicasa representing the Lakota bands, and Dr. Ephraim Hayes as neutral mediator. It was an imperfect system, but it was fair, and it honored Colonel Hart's vision. Through it all, Eva and Dakota remained inseparable. As Dakota healed through the autumn weeks, Eva changed his bandages daily, her touch gentle and sure, and they would sit by the rebuilt cabin the barn had been lost to fire. But neighbors helped raise a new one, talking about the future they would build together. One evening in early November, with the first hard frost silvering the prairie grass and the first geese flying south in long V formations across a sunset sky, Dakota asked Eva to walk with him to the spring. The water reflected the brilliant oranges and reds of the sky, turning the basin into a pool of liquid fire, and Dakota took both her hands in his. "Eva Hart," he said, his voice formal, but his eyes warm with emotion. "You have become the most important person in my world. You are brave and strong and wise, and I want to spend every day of my life beside you, sharing this land, protecting this water, honoring the promises our fathers made, and making new promises of our own. Will you marry me?" Eva didn't hesitate. She threw her arms around him and kissed him soundly, which made Dakota laugh, a sound she treasured more than any words. "Yes," she said, when they finally broke apart, both of them breathless. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Dakota slipped a ring onto her finger, simple silver hammered smooth by a Lakota craftsman, engraved with symbols of water and grass intertwined. Eva looked at it and felt tears of joy prick her eyes. "It's perfect," she whispered. "You are perfect," Dakota replied and kissed her again. The wedding took place the following spring, when the prairie was green and wildflowers carpeted the ground in waves of blue and yellow and red. It was officiated by a circuit preacher who didn't blink at the mixed nature of the congregation. Settlers and Lakota farmers and warriors all gathered to witness the union. Dr. Hayes gave Eva away, his eyes suspiciously bright. Charlotte Blake and Martha Finch stood as Eva's attendants, both of them beaming with pride. Wicasa and Tokala stood with Dakota, and Wicasa spoke a blessing in Lakota that brought tears to many eyes, even among those who didn't understand the words. The celebration afterward lasted 3 days, a joyous blend of settler and Lakota traditions. There was fiddle music and drums dancing and storytelling, roasted venison and beef corn and squash prepared in both traditional Lakota style and settler recipes. Children of both peoples played together by the springs, splashing in the water and laughing with the unself-conscious joy of the innocent. As the sun set on their wedding day, Eva and Dakota stood together at Hart Spring, and their hands clasped, their futures intertwined. Around them, the prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, marked now not by division, but by the fragile growing connections between peoples choosing cooperation over conflict. "What do you think our children will make of this world?" Eva asked softly, one hand resting on her belly, where she suspected, though it was too early to be certain, that new life was already beginning. "I think," Dakota said, pulling her close, "they will make it better, because they will grow up knowing that water should be shared, that promises should be kept, and that love can bridge any divide. They will have the best of both our peoples, your father's sense of justice and my uncle's wisdom. They will be strong." "Like their father," Eva said, looking up at him. "Like their mother," Dakota countered. He touched her face gently, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "You are the strongest person I know, Eva Hart. You faced terror and grief and corruption, and you did not break. You fought for truth when it would have been easier to run. Our children will be proud to have you as their mother." Eva leaned into his touch, feeling a peace she had not known since her father's death, complete, unshakable peace. The scars of the past months remained, but they were healing. And from that healing, something beautiful was growing, a partnership built on respect and trust, a love forged in fire, a future as vast and beautiful as the prairie itself. Hart Spring bubbled up, as it always had, clear and cold and eternal, flowing freely for all who honored it. The water that had been the source of so much conflict had become a symbol of cooperation. Proof that different peoples could share resources fairly when they chose to value justice over greed. Years later, Eva and Dakota's children would play by that spring, learning its history from their parents and their great-uncle Wikasa. They would learn about Colonel Hart's vision and Wikasa's trust, about the courage it took to stand against corruption, and about the love that grew from shared struggle. They would learn that their mother had been brave enough to fight for truth, and their father had been brave enough to stand beside her. But that was in the future. On this spring evening, two people who had been strangers just months ago stood together at the water's edge, holding each other close, ready to face whatever the frontier would bring. Together, always together, always.